I was here, and I don't recall the year. Maybe it was 1995, 4, something like that. I had a short film called The Dinner Party, and I had made it in a very kind of shoot from the hip way when I was in film school, and it turned out quite nice. I really sort of adored that film, and I sent it off to the London Film Festival, see if they'd play it, and it was like a grand moment when I got that envelope saying, you know, we've invited you to the festival and whatnot. That's quite a big deal when you're a film student to be invited over here. So I showed it, and it won a prize. And I just learned 10 minutes ago that this woman was responsible for
There's nothing.
giving it that prize. So.
Well, that's great. It's brilliant to see you back here, and I'm glad we had faith in you then, and we were quite right. So you were the writer-director of that film, and lots of short filmmakers start out as writer-directors really, you know, because there isn't an alternative, and then sort of split into camps, writer or director. Do you have a kind of first love in terms of writing or directing?
You know, I find the directing process a lot more sort of joyful in a way, because it's just, there's so many more facets to it, and it's stimulating, and it's moving, you know, it's typically moving when you're in it, when you're making the film. Whereas writing, I think, is, you know, kind of can be lonely and laborious and whatnot. But I have found, because I've written and directed films that I've written, and I've directed films that I have not written, and I have found that the pleasure is much greater when I've written the films. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of worth it at this point to me to go through the pains to do something that I feel like I'm really going to be able to get behind and give my all to, and really know how to do when I'm behind the camera. You know, it's when you've written it, you really can kind of feel it moment to moment, whereas when it's not yours, there's a gap in the translation a little bit.
Do you think your scripts look a particular way because you know you're going to be directing them?
You know, I think it's just you find your style, the thing that appeals to you, the kind of way you go, and it just becomes it's sort of an unmediated process. It's just what you're drawn to. Mm-hmm. So I don't consciously go after, you know, something very specific that I can say, oh, well, that's my style, so I'm going to do it that way.
Are you very descriptive in the way you write?
I think so, and I think it's more like I'm going, you know, for mood and for light and for a kind of a tonal thing, mm-hmm. rather than, you know, and then the camera moves like this and it goes like that, and, you know, and it's all sort of fancy and cinematic. I think I'm really looking to get into the character's head and the kind of psychology of the piece. Mm-hmm. And so there's a relationship between what I do with the camera, which isn't all that, you know, fancy or crazy or stylized, and how I think it'll, you know, bring out those aspects of the characters. Mm-hmm.
And when you started out, you were kind of relatively late to the film industry, and when you started out, your first gigs were in the edit suite. You worked as an assistant editor and on various different projects. Do you think that edit training has kind of contributed to the way that you tell your stories? I mean, was that a really useful way to start building up as a storyteller?
You know, I wish I could say that, because I was encouraged to go into the editing room because I thought I would get a lot of first-hand experience looking at how things were put together. But when you work on studio films, usually, and when you're kind of on a low level, you're way in another room, you know, doing very technical things, and rarely do you get much involvement in the actual, you know, editing process. That said, having been, you know, I think I was on like 3 features or something before I left LA and went off to film school. And I think that there was a process of going with a film for, you know, 5-6 months and seeing all these different cuts of it and how it would change. While I wasn't in the cutting room hearing about the decisions that were being made moment to moment, hearing the dialogue between an editor and a director, you know, it was an opportunity to see the progression of a film in a way that I think most people don't get to see. So I think I was given a kind of boot camp that primed me for bearing how, you know, how painstaking and sort of long in the tooth it is to get to something refined that's a finished film.
Mm-hmm. And the filmmakers you worked with in the edit room, were they people whose work you particularly admired? I mean, were they just kind of jobs that you had, or was this a kind of, you can say no now?
No, it was interesting. You know, I was lucky to get some really interesting jobs. I started out, I had a friend that was involved on the producing side, of the film Boys in the Hood. I don't even remember what year that was. So I started as an apprentice on that show. And then I did a film with a British director, Biban Kidron, an American film that she did called Use People. Then I did kind of a schlocky film called The Lawnmower Man. I'm not terribly proud of that, but I guess that was interesting in some way. That's really what motivated me to go to film school.
What, The Lawnmower
Yeah,
Man?
when people weren't watching, I was actually writing out my application to film school because I was like, I gotta get out of here. And
When I look back at the cuts from about you, from, sort of like from back in the day, there are a couple of filmmakers that you talk about quite often as being a kind of very big, significant influence. Well, actually, a couple of films that you talk about. One is Drugstore Cowboy, and the other is Sweetie.
yeah,
So Campion, just Gus Van Sant.
yeah.
Were they? I mean, were they just kind of names that you dragged out of the hat, or were they real influences? And if they were was that in terms of theme or aesthetic, or why did you pick on those two?
You know, I think I saw Drugstore Cowboy and Sweetie at a point in my life where I was really ripe to understand what it meant to be the director, the person, you know, the author of the film. So it was I pulled those two films out because I recall very distinctly being in a theater and watching them and feeling what it meant to be the, you know, be the auteur, to be the vision of the film. Particularly with Sweetie. And I remember seeing that film by myself. For some reason, I was sitting in a theater alone, and I had this kind of revelation, like, well, who's this woman, you know, making this movie that's so personal? And so it felt kind of risque to me. It felt like, oh, you know, those aren't things you're supposed to talk about. Those aren't ideas you're supposed to explore in film. And here's this woman, and she's doing it. Like, I can do that. Why can't I do that?
And what about Drugstore? What was the
And
influence
Drugstore
there?
Cowboy, I think it was a similar thing. I don't think that there was anything particularly that, like that, the feeling that I got from that film wasn't as primitive as the feeling that I had watching Sweetie. But I did know that he was a gay filmmaker and that he was exploring, you know, worlds that were like dangerous and sort of outside the mainstream. And yet he had made this film that was made by I guess it was a mini major at the time, a small film company, but it was a, you know, fairly wide release. And I thought, okay, so here's somebody else that's working in a way that can straddle the mainstream but be kind of an independent vision. Mm-hmm. And so they were kind of two like prototypes for me. They were early moments of recognizing that it could be done, that I could say something singular, but it you know, that it could reach more than people in my basement or something.